something with it. Yeah? And that's the next goal, is to talk about a couple of things that we can do with our data. So let's look at some ideas here. As always, this is all linkable from the Moodle site. And I'll leave it there forever, so it's always there for you. Alright, so here I'm going to write a program. And this is going to be a little calculator. That seems fun. And it's just going to do some manipulation of some input. But look at that. There's an add wrong button, which might make me think this is not going to work. It's all right. So it's asking me for some variables. Oh, baby, algebra. I love algebra. X, what's X? Give me a number.
5.
5. Beautiful. Okay, now it wants to know what Y is. Give me another number.
12.
316.
316. You are amazing. Okay, great. Now notice this input was slightly different. This input was kind of that rude dialog box kind of input, wasn't it? Yeah, I did that just because it's faster. And because I'm going to do some different things here. Are you okay with that? I'll show you that. It's no big deal. But so what is 5 plus 316? You should have picked easier numbers.
320. Wait, what was that?
5 and 316 are our two numbers. And 5 plus 316 is, of course, 5,316.
Oh, no, it's not.
The computer said this.
It must be right.
It's the computer. It's on the internet. It's got to be true.
You didn't add them, you concatenated them.
Did you hear that? Little chills. What did that mean, what you just said?
Scrunched them together.
We scrunched them together. And what's the real problem?
They're text.
That the computer wasn't smart enough to figure out, you idiot, those are numbers. I need a command for you idiot, those are numbers. Yeah? And I'm not calling you an idiot, I'm calling the computer an idiot because remember the rock. And that's starting to make sense, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so clearly it could get confused very easily. Now just to show you, we can get it right. So let's do the same ones. 5. What was it, 316?
Yep.
321.
All right, so there's clearly an important idea going on here. Would you agree? That when we have variables, see, the computer stores everything really as binary. 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, and all that stuff. And gosh, I would love to go into those details, but we should just move on. The problem is, the way that it goes from text to ones and zeros is different than the way it goes from numbers to ones and zeros. Can you accept that? And in fact, there's multiple ways of putting numbers to ones and zeros. Just take it on faith right now that the way that it stores integers is different than the way it stores real numbers. And real numbers can only be approximated. We can't get a perfect real number in a computer. Whoa. No computer can do pi, for example. We can approximate it as deep as you want, but we can't do it. Because computers just can't do real numbers. Here's all that matters. What matters is that we need to know the main types of variables and we need to be able to convert between them when we want to. Does that make sense? And so the types of data that we care about in JavaScript are string, number, and in number there's two variants. One's called int. What does that stand for?
Integers.
Integers. Oh dear, math class flashback. What were those integers? Not only did you tell the math teacher you would never need this again, some of you are that math teacher. The integers are the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah? 3.5, is that an integer? No, it is not. And suffice to say that computers store integers differently than they store real numbers like 3.5, and in computing we call that a float. because it's a floating point real number. A lot of theory behind that, but we're just going to gloss right over it. But can you agree that we have really now 4 types of data that we're going to worry about? We have strings, we have ints, we have floats, and we got objects, which is pretty much everything else. Can you buy that? Okay, so now let's take a look at this code and see what we can learn from it. Oh, I don't need that thing anymore. So don't worry about line 9. I'm not going to worry about that. Take a look at add wrong because it looks completely reasonable. Var x gets prompt x. So what do you suppose that prompt statement does? It pops up the dialog that takes input. Kind of rude, interrupts the flow of the program, but it's easy for the programmer, so we'll just do it now. Okie dokie. All right, so we prompt in asking for x. Now I prompt in asking for y. Do those lines look completely reasonable?
Yes.
Absolutely. And now we look at this line 15. Var sum gets x plus y. Does that seem reasonable? Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does, because the whole idea of making a new variable, we'll call it sum. Well, that's a great idea because it holds the sum. Should be whatever the value of x is plus whatever the value of y is. That should work just great. And then we're just going to alert out a semi-complicated string. There's the value x, the string plus, the value y, the string plus, and the sum, or equals, and then the sum. It's a little ugly, but we could do it, right? That's all very reasonable, yet it broke. Would you agree? It didn't really break. And this is one of the most important things to understand as a programmer. And you saw this, I saw this in a lot of you, is that, when you first started, we got some error messages and things were crashing and they were spectacular. And that was kind of scary, but what was scarier? When it didn't complain, it just didn't work right. That's worse, isn't it? That's the difference between a crash and a bug. And a crash, well, you'll get some clues. And I showed most of you a really handy tool. That web developer thing was so great. That F12 key. If you go to console, it will often tell you if there were errors. And if you saw me do it with you, when I looked at the error, what did I do? I told you what it meant, which is not always obvious, but because I have some experience, I was able to say, oh, when I see that, it usually means, and in almost every case, what did I say? When I see that, it usually means you spelled something wrong. That's the most common error we're going to have in this assignment. I expected it all over the place, and I was not disappointed. And again, as you teach this,
so it gives you that error, like on line 36, it means you spelled it wrong somewhere before that?
Right. It
Because
doesn't.
at that point, it doesn't know what it is.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It tells you what line it noticed the error, which is not necessarily where the error happened, right? Right? You could, cut your gas line, or cut your brake lines somewhere, and you don't notice until you try to stop 10 miles down the road. The crash doesn't necessarily tell you where things went wrong. It tells you where there are consequences of it going wrong. That's a horrible example. There's another really neat thing that we can do with this console. And that is, it's an interactive console, which means we can play with JavaScript in real time and learn a little bit more about what's going on. Well, that sounds intriguing, doesn't it? Let me show you a little bit about what we can do with this. First, let's just see, does it know what x is? No, it doesn't know what x is. So I'm just going to play a little bit. You ready? X gets 5. Now I'm going to type out x, and it tells me, oh, that's 5. That was fun, wasn't it? Okay, this is weird kind of fun. But y gets 3. Tell me about y. That's 3. Okay, how about this? Sum gets x plus y. What are we going to get? 35? 53? 8. What did I do? Oh, sorry, some. What's that end one? It says 8. Why is it working now? What's the matter with this stupid thing? All right. Here's another really marvelous tool we've got. Many languages have this. There's a tool called type of. And when I ask for the type of X, what type of thing is that? Try and bump it up. Aha! That's a really handy tool. It's telling me what kind of thing it thinks that is. That's a number, Andy. That's what it's saying. You agree? Yeah, that's a number. That makes me super happy. Because now I know that's a number. Okay, let's try this. Name gets Andy. Notice that it prints Andy out in quotes. That's a clue. Could we use that type of thing again? Yeah, sure, why not? What type of thing is Andy? Well, we've all wondered that. But that's a string. We okay? Now check this out. X gets alert. That's the line that was in our code, isn't it? So it's actually going to run that little JavaScript. Oh, not alert. Sorry. Prompt. Yeah. X is 3. What are you seeing? I see quotes there. Let's just check. Type of X. What type of thing is X? It's a string. Which is text. Even though it looks like a number, is it a number? No. And that's because JavaScript is storing it thinking we want to treat it as text, not that we want to treat it as numbers. Now, some languages are what's called strongly typed, which means you have to define exactly what type of thing something is, and you never shall change it. Java, not JavaScript, is very much like that. C++ is a lot like that. JavaScript is what's called a loosely typed language, which means when you just use a variable, it tries to guess for you what type it is. That could make us nervous, right? Because again, Terminator means. Most of the time, it does just fine. But do you think sometimes it guesses wrong? Yeah. And here's where it goes wrong all the time. Whenever the user types anything in, whether it's in the form, or whether it's in a prompt box or whatever, anytime the user types anything in, what do you suppose JavaScript assumes? What kind of information do you think it is assuming we're getting? Strings, because everything can be read in as a string. That's reasonable. But do we always want it to be a string? No. Sometimes, what do we want it to be? A number. Does that make sense? So I wonder if there's a way to force a string to become a number. To say, no, you idiot, that's a number. There it is. And it is this. Parse int. Parse just means analyze some text. Okay with that? So parse int x, what that means is take x, if there's an integer in it, give me that, and make it a real integer. So that really means convert x to integer. Now I hope you noticed that I paused there for a second because I did not remember the name of the function. Why do I want you to notice that? Look it up. I've done this in 12 different languages. They all have that function. It's all cut something different. In fact, I seriously almost typed the Python version right there. How worried are we about getting exactly the right syntax? That'd be great. When you know only one language, you'll get to the point where that's not bad. But the much more important thing is I know it's there somewhere and I can look it up. Yeah? So, okay, there is such a thing as parseInt, and it happened, I had code in front of me that already did it. So that was useful, but not necessarily. Could I have another Google tab open? Let me tell you, I worked on one of your exercises that you're doing probably tomorrow. I did a demo of it last night at about 10 o'clock, and my brain was fried. And I made all kinds of idiotic mistakes. And I haven't written that program in JavaScript in a year or two, and so I was using syntax from 4 other languages. I had the Google tab open the whole time. I was completely unembarrassed and unashamed of having to look up, oh, I'm looking for the length of a string, how do I do that in this language? Is that okay that you do that? It's wonderful. So it's okay to not know these things as long as you know that they exist and you know how to look for them. You see, how much time have we spent? You all want a little dictionary of all these commands, and I have refused to give you one, haven't I? I did give you one, but I don't love it. Because that's not the point. That stuff will change. The point is, do I know that there's a way to do this, and can I find it if I need it? All right, so now x gets parsed of x. Now let's take a look at x. It's the 3 without quotes and type of x. Oops. It's now a number. Do you see how powerful that idea is? So what we're saying is when you have a variable, there's a few things you need to know. And again, this doesn't even matter what language you're in. The way that you deal with it might matter. But in any kind of programming, this variable is based on this really important idea. Every variable has a type. Maybe you define it, maybe you don't. But every variable has a type, and you need to know what it is. Every variable has a name. You need to know what that is. Right? And every variable will typically have some starting value. So remember when I said you're always writing comments first? You didn't do it, I watched. That's all right. It was an easy one. That was easy? Yes, that was easy. When you find yourself wanting to make a variable, the comment you write, I don't care how you write it, but it answers these questions. What's the variable's name? What's the variable's type? What's the variable's initial value? That is your comment for make a new variable. Does that make sense? Put it in any format you want. I've had students do it in Chinese. Great. You just have to interpret for me. As long as you answer those questions, that's how you write that statement of comment. Does that make sense? Huh? Sure. I've got it in a little chart too. What's the variable's name? What's its type? And what's its starting value?
So, just to kind of like summarize and go back. If we had not put quotations around the original prompt X and prompt Y, would it have worked correctly?
No, and the reason is, well, the way if you don't put what's expecting is a string, right? It's expecting you to tell it, what should I ask you using? Okay, fine, let's go to this.
So you just have to put that parse in, like, because it's going to turn it into an integer?
Back up. All right, so I told you how to think about variables, didn't I? Let me tell you how to think about input. Okay, so input is I'm getting something from the user, right? What do I need to know if I'm going to be talking about input? Here's what I need to know. Okay, tell me the answer. Tell me the answer. See, that's not fair. I shouldn't ask for an answer if I didn't ask you a question. Yeah? So input always has some implied output. Would you agree with that? Now in HTML, I'm going to do the output by writing a label. With the prompt, that's the text that goes in the prompt. Other languages may have different approaches. But anytime you do input, the first thing you do is make sure you've done some output. You've asked the user some sort of question so they know what they're supposed to do. Would you agree? What else does input imply? Okay, throw me the ball.
I don't know the ball.
Yeah, sure. You can throw me a fake ball. Throw it hard. I deserve it.
What kind of data?
No, just throw me a ball. You know what I should have done? When I asked you to throw me a ball, I should have got out my mitt. I should have a place to catch it before I asked for things. Would you agree? That's the other thing that input implies. You have a variable to catch the input. So that's an interesting thing. Should an input statement then ever be the first line of an algorithm? No, because it has implications. You can't do an input unless you've done some kind of output, and you don't do an input unless you have some sort of variable ready to catch it. Does that make sense? There's ways we can combine it, and it works differently in different languages, but the real idea here is there's this concept of input, and that always implies these two things. What did I tell the user, and where am I going to put that? Does that make sense? Okay.
Can I make a suggestion real quick?
Sure.
It helps me understand it better. In the prompt, your capital X, capital Y, in quotations, that could say, please enter a number for X, like a sentence.
Sure.
Because I think it's confusing when you see the variable X and Y, and then the string X and Y. So if
Sure.
it said something like, please enter a number for X, and please enter a number for Y.
That's perfectly great. I've already written this, and I don't want to change it there because I have videos on it, but you're right.
But just for helping.
Yeah, yeah.
What happens if they don't put in a number?
It'll crash. Is there a way to fix it from crashing? Yes, but we're not going to do it today. We're just going to let it crash. How's that? You're welcome. Exception handling is a beautiful thing, but not today. All right, let's take a look at our code again and see if we can follow what's going on here, because the real key idea is this. We want to actually start thinking about how we write real programs. So I'm going to input two numbers. Var x is prompt, make it as elaborate as you want. I just made it simple here. Var y is prompt y. Var sum is x plus y. Now you can see that even though, is that line perfectly fine? There's nothing wrong with that line, but what did the computer do? It said, well, x is a string, y is a string, you must want me to concatenate. Because that's what I do, the strings. Take a look at this version. X is prompt x, y is prompt y. Has that changed at all? Take a look at this line, 28, compare that to line 15. Has that changed at all? Compare line 16 to line 29. Has that changed at all? What's the only thing that changed?
The parts.
First thing I wrote was a comment. Force those variables to integer format. Then I look up the code, how do I do that in this language? And I'm like, okay, I'm happy. X is an integer, Y is an integer. Now, this line, rather than concatenating, what do I expect the plus sign is going to do now? Add. That's a powerful idea, isn't it? It's a real powerful idea. So we can do some really neat things. We can do all of the standard math operations once we've got numbers. Let me show them to you real quick. 5 minus 3, it does that just fine. How about this one? 5 times 3, in computing you use a star for multiplication. 15, that's working pretty well. How about this one? 15 divided by 3. Let's do this one. 10 divided by 3. What's that do? Well, that's interesting. It did give us an answer, but when I divided two integers, what kind of answer could I potentially get? Float. And the float is not precise, but it's okay. Now let me show you another little math trick that we sometimes do. How about this? Parse int 10 divided by 3. What will that do? That gives me an integer division of 10 divided by 3. Could that be useful? Especially when I know that floating point is not 100% reliable. But that's not the whole answer either. Is 10 divided by 3 equal to 3? No. What is 10 divided by 3 equal to? The most precise answer is 3 remaining 1. Yeah? It's an infinite repeat. So it turns out that a lot of times we prefer integer division because it can clean things up a little bit. And so when I say 10 divided by 3, that's half of an integer division. I also want to get the remainder of an integer division. Yeah? And so we might do this. That's the modulus operator. Yeah, I know it looks like a percent sign. But what that tells me is the remainder of an integer division. That seems like an obscure math fact for 1,000, doesn't it? But it turns out this is a real handy thing. I'm telling you, you're going to use it later on this afternoon. Because getting the remainder of a division problem turns out to be often very useful. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. Okay. So do you agree we can do math? As long as we're working with numbers. Do you agree we can convert data types? And that can be useful. Let me show you another big concept, and then we'll do some lunch, and we'll come back and implement it. Sound good? Is lunch here?
I was just gonna go check.
Not a pain. Not a pain. Let me get this idea, which is easy, but huge. Please enter your name. You've heard about my hero, Tim Berners-Lee. I'm going to click that. Thanks for inventing HTML. That was nice. What if I'm not Tim? Apparently, it doesn't think that much of me. So, something very profound just happened here. What's that? AI, baby, machine learning. That's what we call it because that sounds so cool. Most machine learning is nothing more than an if statement, or a lot of them. What did I do? My computer seems to be making a decision. Is it? Do rocks make decisions? No. Computers don't make decisions either, but the programmer does and can store that decision in the logic. And that's what we're doing. So I have this thing set up so if my name is Tim Berners-Lee, it thanks me for writing HTML. If my name is anything else, it just says, do I know you? So let's take a look at how that works. All right. So up to now, all of this is feeling great to you. Are you okay with this? This is familiar. Yes, Andy, this is familiar. Now, take a look at this if. Now, we know the keyword if from English, right? If it's raining, bring an umbrella. Now, let's examine that a little more closely. What we're really saying is, it is raining. That's a true and false question. That's a condition. A condition is anything that can be evaluated as true or false. Comes back to binary again. In computing, anytime we're trying to make any sort of decision at all, no matter how complicated it seems, even a chess program, everything comes down to stuff that can be either true or false. That's just all there is. It can be true, it can be false. And so the condition I'm going to use right now is this comparison. Is the variable username equal to the value Tim Berners-Lee? Does that sort of make sense? Take a look at something. This time I did say equals, didn't I? And what do you see? The double equals in many programming languages really means comparison. So comparison and assignment are different things, and so I try to read them differently. So I'm not assigning the value Tim Berners-Lee to username. I'm checking to see if they have the same value. Yeah? So that's a big deal. Now, in JavaScript, a condition usually goes inside parentheses. Point of order, if is not a condition. If is a function that takes a condition. And so the condition is this comparison. We can do other kinds of comparison like not equal to, or if we're talking about numbers, we can do less than, greater than, less than equal to, greater than or equal to. But the most common one is equality check, for strings anyway. So if the username is equal to this, now you see I've got a mustache thing going on, right? And here's the deal. If this condition is true, then I can do all the stuff